And we're live. Welcome to this Q&A with Dr. Ross Greene. I'm Kim Hopkins. We're from Lives in the Balance. And we wanted to offer this opportunity to parents who have had some exposure to our model, whether it be a little bit or a whole lot, to ask their questions and get some answers. So, hi, Dr. Greene. You want to say hello to everybody?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad that people were able to join in, and I apologize for our technical glitches the last time.
Yes, and we're very happy that we have figured it all out. So, why don't we get started right away and not waste any of our time together? So we've had a few questions come in, and if anybody has a question while the webinar is happening, feel free to type it in on your sidebar there and it will pop up for me to see. And as time allows, we'll answer any questions we possibly can. All right. Our first question, a mother said, I'm new to taking this approach, where to start? There seems to be a very high pile of parent concerns. Where do I start with my son? Any expectation is set with challenging behavior such as showering, self-care, socially withdrawing, homework, morning and evening routines. I'm overwhelmed. When I have asked in the past, he would be direct and say, what's my reward if I do these things? How do I decide where to start?
Well, first, what's my reward if I do these things suggests that he has been possibly well trained to expect rewards in exchange for doing things. That's sometimes what we get into with kids. It's a bit of a slippery slope when we train them to expect rewards for meeting expectations. They expect rewards for meeting expectations. My attitude is I'd rather avoid all that in the first place. I totally understand the mom's feeling of being overwhelmed. A lot of behaviorally challenging kids have very large piles of unsolved problems. And that can be a bit overwhelming because those unsolved problems have piled up over time. And so it is good that mom now knows what those unmet expectations or unsolved problems are. Part of the reason in many kids those unsolved problems pile up so high is because they weren't identified in the first place. So it is a very good thing that they have now been identified in the first place. Unfortunately, then comes the feeling of being overwhelmed, because now that we know what they are, we are often blown away at how many there are and aren't exactly sure where to start, which is what this mom is saying. Now, what I would strongly recommend, as I always do, is that mom complete the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems for her son. It's going to help her answer the question, why? Why is my son challenging? And the generic answer to that is because he's lacking the skills to not be challenging, but we need to figure out what skills he in particular is lacking so that we know him, so that we see him through the prism of lagging skills. Then comes the really important part, and seeing him through the prism of lagging skills is a really important part. But for us to know what we're going to work on, we need to identify unsolved problems. And the best way to think of unsolved problems is, as this mom is doing, unmet expectations. Expectations a child is having difficulty meeting. And it's conceivable, when I do this with parents for the first time, there are times when there are 30, 40, 50 unmet expectations. And that's simply evidence of the fact that there are many, many expectations that the kid is having difficulty meeting. And it is those unmet expectations, especially when we try to force the issue and get them met, that set the stage for challenging episodes. So we need to know what they are. For mom to know how to fill out the ALSUP, in the guided tour for parents, there's 3 sections, and the second section is identify lagging skills and unsolved problems. And in that section, there is a 45-minute audio program to teach her how to use the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. Also, in the paperwork section of the resources section of the Lives in the Balance website, she'll not only find the ALSUP, but also the ALSUP guide. It's going to help her know how to use the ALSUP as well. what she's going to end up with, if she's the typical mom and he's the typical behaviorally challenging kid, is a lot of lagging skills and a lot of unsolved problems. And now to her question, where to start? Here's the easy answer. It actually doesn't matter that much. The thing you want to be really careful of is not to try to, now that you know what those unsolved problems are, is not to try to solve so many of them at once that you end up solving none at all. So you really want to do prioritize. If you ask me for an algorithm, the algorithm is start with unsolved problems that are setting in motion safety issues. I'm a safety first guy. Very hard for people to work together on solving problems when they are, one or both of them is feeling unsafe. If we don't have safety issues, then frequency is sometimes a good place to start. In some families, definitely not all, but definitely some, there are 3, 4, 5 unsolved problems that are accounting for 70 to 80% of challenging episodes. Those are a good place to start, because if you can knock off 3 or 4 unsolved problems, and in doing it, knock off 70 to 80% of challenging episodes, those are a great place to start. But now let me go back to what I originally said. It doesn't matter that much. Just don't bite too much out of the apple at once. Getting the ball rolling on solving problems collaboratively is more important than deciding what unsolved problem to start on. You do want to pick your 2 or 3. You don't want to take too big a bite out of the apple, but I would not split hairs on where to start. It's more important to know which ones you're starting on and get started. Kim, anything to add to that?
I just want to let folks know that I was able to put up a link to the ALSUP guide, and the audio that you referenced are all up on the sidebar there, just for easy reference.
Shall we move on to another question?
Yes, let's see. We just had a question come in, so we can move to that one. All right. My son is 5 years old, and an unsolved problem that remains unsolved is losing, in other words, not winning at anything competitive. He's being assessed for SPD and has very low self-esteem. Any ideas where to start?
Well, and the part that you didn't read is that mom is from the UK. Very nice that we have people across the big pond who are participating in this program as well. I love that. The unsolved problem, if I like to word these to get the ball rolling, and Mom, you've given us a good start, losing and not winning at anything competitive. Now, if you're familiar with the ALSUP guide, then you know what I'm about to say next. That unsolved problem is clumped. There's too many unsolved problems in that one unsolved problem. So we want to make it more specific. So if you were in my office, or if I was in a meeting with you, I would say, give me some examples of things that he's having difficulty losing and not winning at. And let's say the mom said playing Monopoly. Now it would be, and all unsolved problems start with the word difficulty. Difficulty losing when not playing Monopoly difficulty losing when playing Monopoly with the family. I'd rather avoid the word not in unsolved problems. So I'd rather go with, now let me think about that one a second. Now I would ask, if I was in the meeting, what expectation is he really having difficulty meeting? Those of you who know the ALSUP guide know that is one. Oh, good. Yeah. Excellent. Mom just wrote in, losing at Jenga in the classroom. Excellent. I'm going to use that example. Skip the Monopoly. We'll go with Jenga. And by the way, I've been seeing a lot about, I must say, in the last 2 or 3 schools that I've done supervision with, Jenga was a major unsolved problem. So apparently Jenga is doing well on sales. Difficulty losing at Jenga in the classroom. That's a pretty good unsolved problem, but I just want to see if we can word it a little bit better. Maybe not. I might ask, what expectation is he having difficulty meeting when he's playing Jenga? And we might get it refined to, here's the expectation, being a good sport when he loses. So now that's probably what the expectation is. Difficulty, being a good sport when losing at Jenga in the classroom. That's going to be the wording of our unsolved problem. Now, many people think I'm a little bit too obsessed with the wording of the unsolved problem. I don't think I am. I think that I know that the wording of the unsolved problem has a great deal to do with whether the kid is actually going to participate in Plan B. Because as most people probably know, we're going to take that now well-worded unsolved problem and insert it into the introduction to the empathy step, beginning with, I've noticed that, and ending with, what's up? Here's what it's going to sound like when we introduce it to the kid. I've noticed that you're having difficulty being a good sport when you're losing at Jenga in the classroom. What's up? And now we hope he talks. If he talks, we are now on the hook for drilling well. And the drilling cheat sheet, also in the paperwork section of the resources section on the Lives in a Balance website, is going to help a lot there because there's 8 drilling strategies on there. And unfortunately, that's as far as I can take, Mom, because I do not know what he's going to say. Whatever he says tells us what problem needs to be solved, what concerns need to be addressed might be a better way to put it. We know what problem needs to be solved. He's having difficulty being a good sport when he's losing at Jenga in the classroom. But if we don't know what his concerns are, and we don't know what concerns need to be addressed, then we actually don't know what the solution is going to be. Now, here's what one of our people who are participating in the webinar has said. He gets frustrated when he cannot get his need met when he wants it. I don't think that's going to be what he says. We want to go with what he says. He might say that he gets frustrated, and we're going to want to drilling for information so that we have the clearest possible sense of what's getting in his way. I have one theory about why this problem isn't solved yet, and I could be completely wrong. If we ask him about all times that he's getting frustrated over losing and not winning a game, we may not get much out of him because we're asking about something that is way too big. By splitting the unsolved problem and asking about only one, we are much more likely to have the boy start to talk. Once we understand why he's having difficulty being a good sport when losing at Jenga in the classroom, we can then say to him, do you think that also helps us understand why you're having difficulty being a good sport when your team is losing in soccer? And so it goes. But we've got to word the unsolved problem well first, or we run a tremendous risk of getting absolutely nothing out of the kid. And if we don't know what his concerns are, we won't know what concerns need to be addressed. And that's why a lot of unsolved problems remain unsolved. Kim, anything to add?
I think you covered a lot of ground with that answer. And yeah, I'm glad we started talking about how important it is to unclump unsolved problems. And I'm often telling folks you can be hopeful for a domino effect, that talking about Jenga and the solution that you come up with does in fact help with soccer and other types of games. And if they don't, it means we have some information to learn about those specific situations.
We have some interesting comments. Can I read one of them?
Yeah, go right ahead.
One of our listeners is saying, I just want to say I'm pleased with this method. Definitely helps me as a mom to remind me of my son's difficulties and focus on the difficulties, not the resulting behavior. My son does have a background of pervasive developmental disorder. We have many providers, although I find myself asking, how do I parent him? And many can't answer, but they recommend more tests and medication trials. This is an eye-opener, a new perspective for me. I am delighted. And you're saying a lot of important things there. The most important thing to me is We are so accustomed to focusing on what's going on, what I call downstream, the behavior, where we need to be focused on what's going on upstream, the problems that are causing those behaviors. My quick answer to how should I parent him is figure out what his lagging skills are so you know your kid. Figure out what his unsolved problems and unmet expectations are. They're the same thing, by the way. So you know what you're working on. And get to work solving problems collaboratively and proactively. There are so many things being thrown at parents these days about how to parent. By the way, it's not just parents. There's lots of things being thrown at educators these days about how to run a classroom too. But this is for parents. There's so much being thrown at parents that it's very easy to lose sight of the big picture, very easy to get very muddled by all of the advice that's being given out there. What I find is that when people know their kid through the prism of lagging skills, know their kid through the prism of unsolved problems, and get to work starting to solve those problems collaboratively and proactively so that they are partners with their kid, not adversaries. Slowly but surely, the problems start to get solved, and all those behaviors that are the byproducts of those problems that were floating downstream, they're not floating downstream anymore. All the actions upstream.
I'm wondering, because we have a bunch of questions coming in around a similar topic, and so sort of the next step of what you're talking about. So when parents, they're saying they're using the ALSIP, they're identifying unsolved problems and lagging skills, and they really wish their school would do the same. But the school is very focused on behavior. They'd like to know what we would think about how do you approach a school about changing their lenses.
It's a tough one, but it can be done. My usual first advice is find someone in the building, classroom teacher, guidance counselor, principal, assistant principal, school psychologist, someone who the parent believes is going to be sympathetic to the issues and let the parent know how to navigate in this particular school. I wish I could say, always go to the principal and talk to him or her about it, but I wouldn't always say that. I think this is school specific. So I think we want to find someone who knows the ropes in the building, who knows the hierarchy, who knows how things work. Sometimes the principal is not the person to start with. Sometimes the school disciplinarian is not the person to start with. Let's find out who we should start with and just have a sit down and talk with them. And the way that talk usually goes, and by the way, there's all kinds of resources. We can point them to the Lives in a Balance website, where there is just a boatload of resources for educators in the educators in schools section. Just a boatload. I mean, more than they would be able to know what to do within 6 months. But the place to point them first is the walking tour. Because that's the whole model laid out in streaming video and audio programming. And it's a relatively quick tour of the CPS model. If you want to hand them something, you hand them a copy of Lost at School. Just remember, the Lives in a Balance website is free. Lost at School is going to set you back, I don't know how much it is, 10 or 14
11,
bucks, something like
yeah,
that.
11, 12. Mm-hmm.
Right, something like that. But the whole key is don't go in adversarial. Don't go in with solutions. Go in with concerns. We don't want to get into what I often see whenever I'm asked to join into a situation where parents and school folks are not getting along. It's usually because of something that's called dueling solutions. Concerns have not been discussed, and this is not uncommon in the course of human affairs. Instead, they've jumped right past their concerns and gone straight to solutions. And now both parties are putting solutions on the table, and those concerns have been lost in the process, and we are now engaged in what's known as a power struggle. What I often have to do is have people sort of take a step back. We don't have the slightest idea if those solutions are going to work until we find out what the concerns of both parties are. Step number one, find somebody in the building who can give you the lay of the land and let you know how to navigate the building so as to advocate for your kid and help people get some new lenses on and implement some new practices so that things go better for your kid in the building. Kim, anything to add?
Thinking about how I had to do this with my daughter's preschool last year, and it was not the director that I went to, it was a teacher, and handed her Lost at School and just started having a conversation about how, um, star sticker charts and all of that we were seeing, even though my daughter was adjusting for the most part to them, there was a lot of kids who were not, and having that conversation with them, and just a place to start. And I did put the link to the educator's information from the website right in the side panel there for everybody's reference.
I often find that while people in schools have often been doing sticker charts and red light, yellow light, green light, and clips and points and stickers for a very long time, and while it's true that things we've been doing for a very long time are things that become part of what we do, I also often find that people are not necessarily deeply devoted to stickers, deeply devoted to happy faces or levels or points. They're not deeply devoted to them. It's just what they learned and what they've been doing. But I often find when we ask, is that sticker chart working for old Timmy here? They're quite clear that the answer is no. And if I was to be so bold, and I'm sometimes this bold, to ask, are we open to moving away from the sticker chart, or are we sort of religiously devoted to the sticker chart? The answer is, I'm not religiously devoted to the sticker chart. You got something that'll work better for old Timmy? I'll be all over it. So I often find that people are not it's very hard to be philosophically devoted to a sticker. But here's the point I always make. I've been saying this a lot lately. I can think of at least two things that stickers don't do. Stickers do not solve the problems that are causing challenging episodes in behaviorally challenging kids. They just do not do that. Stickers weren't designed to do that. Stickers do not teach the skills that behaviorally challenging kids are lacking. And why don't stickers do that? I've been saying this a lot lately, because a sticker is just a sticker. I don't find that people are philosophically devoted to stickers if we help them recognize that this kid has lagging skills and unsolved problems, and that stickers don't teach skills and stickers don't solve problems. And then they're willing to forego those stickers often and move on to something that's going to work better and make a lot more sense.
Well said.
Thank you.
Piggybacking on that, we had a question about a parent who's in school taking early education classes, and the professor said that we should not be using competition in the early years in the learning environment, and just asking us for our opinion on that.
Competition sounds like they may have read something by Alfie Kohn. And now a plug. Alfie Kohn is the keynote speaker at the 5th Annual Lives in the Balance Summit on Non-Punitive, Non-Adversarial Interventions for At-Risk Kids in Portland, Maine, next Friday, October 16th. And for those of you who can't make it, we will be not doing live streaming of Alfie's keynote and the keynote of Dr. Joan Durant, who's the keynote in the afternoon. She has been a very important player fighting against the use of corporal punishment in North America and globally. Two dynamite keynote speakers, but Alfie has been one of the people who is not real big on competition. I'm not real big on competition either, because competition involves comparing, and I don't really see the point in comparing. Tried very hard in my own two kids to do zero comparing. I don't really see the point in it, because the fact that Joey's doing better than Tommy, if we're going to use that as an inducement for Tommy to do better, I don't think it's going to work. And why don't I think it's going to work? Because I think that Tommy's already motivated. And why do I think that Tommy's already motivated to do better? Because I believe that kids do well if they can, and because I believe that doing well is preferable. So I would have to believe that competition added something of value to the mix to help Tommy do better. And I don't. Now, is it a competitive world? Yeah. Do we add value in the early years by making things competitive to prepare kids for the real world? Actually, I don't think adults comparing kids adds that value. Kids compare themselves to each other. Kids are always looking at, how am I doing compared to so-and-so? I literally have done very little comparing with my kids, but they still look at each other and see how the other one's doing, and they still report to me about somebody who's doing better than them at something and somebody who's doing worse at them than something. So adults comparing doesn't really add value to that. Kids do it pretty naturally as it is. Yes, it's a competitive world, but here's the thing I think we should be promoting even more: accepting individual differences. Not everybody's going to be a rocket scientist. Not everybody's going to be a plumber. Not everybody is going to be a school teacher. Not everybody is going to be an occupational therapist. That's okay. So I actually, from that perspective, think that the thing we actually ought to mostly be promoting is acceptance of individual differences, and their competition really doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. Comparing doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm not allergic to competition because I think it occurs naturally in the world. People naturally look at what somebody else has or is doing better or worse or doesn't have. Adults participating in that, I think, is completely unnecessary. I think we'd be a whole lot better off if we were helping kids accept each other's individual differences, no matter how smart they are, no matter what color they are, no matter how they did on the SATs, no matter what college they go to, no matter how much money they make. Kim, what do you think?
My other thought would be, when we're working on solving problems and teaching skills with kids, the goal is not to have Tommy look as good as Johnny. The goal is to have Tommy looking better than Tommy looks now. And that's how we're measuring success.
Each kid has his own baseline. All we're trying to do is help everybody look as good as possible, not compared to somebody else, as good as possible themselves.
Awesome. Yes, answering a quick question, there is a way to listen to the webinar at a later date. You will get an email at its conclusion within an hour after we're done that gives you a link to the replay. So absolutely. Another question, I live in New York City. Can you recommend any schools you have worked with and who know the CPS model?
There are some schools in New York City that are implementing the CPS model. None of them are far enough along yet for me to actually recommend them. So the answer to that is no, not yet, but someday soon.
And if you're talking with schools in New York City, you could ask them, have they heard about the model? And if so, how much exposure have they had to date? That could give you some information. Let's see, we have a participant from Canada. Hi from Ontario, Canada. Thanks for doing these webinars. On the lines of competition, even though we try and continually teach them that they're their very own selves, a competitiveness is constant. Who will be first in line? Who eats what and how much? Who gets on the bus first? And I might actually be missing part of this comment, because the next part that I see is, can you start me off on a plan B with both of them? And I don't know where the middle part of this comment is. So if you can maybe resend it, and we'd be happy to role play how do you get started on plan B. Sorry about that, but I don't see it, Teresa.
Well, and you know what? It's a very interesting question, even though we don't have the whole thing. And what I mean by that is, I always wonder how much have adults contributed to that? How much does just the mere setup of things contribute to that? And how much are we working on in schools mutually satisfactory outcomes so that the kid who's last in line knows that someday he will be first in line, and everybody feels that assurance? The kid who's last on the bus will someday be first on the bus. How much are we promoting mutually satisfactory outcomes in our homes and in our schools? And the answer is frequently we're not. In some places we are, but frequently we're not. I think adults can play a huge role just in terms of how we structure things, what we talk about, and how we organize things, to actually have kids be less competitive with each other. A lot of this is how we set it up. There's my thoughts on what we know. And I'm not sure that what Teresa just sent us is going to help us with a more specific answer to her question either. I think we're missing the question part.
I'm wondering if she is talking about, like, for the example of who gets on the bus first, if there's, if either for her 10-year-old son or 8-year-old daughter, if they're not on the bus first, if that causes maladaptive behavior.
Got it. So if
That's
this is
something.
just between she and her two kids, and this is not a school issue, but just a home issue because both the 8 and the 10-year-old want to be on the bus first. If that's all it is, then that's a plan B between mom and the 10-year-old and the 8-year-old. And here's how I word the unsolved problem. I've noticed that you all have difficulty if you're not on the bus first. What's up? That's the introduction to the empathy step. Now the mom is actually problem-solving facilitator because the two parties involved in the plan B are the two kids. Same steps. We want to get the concerns of both parties entered into consideration. Who knows? The 8-year-old might say, I never get on the bus first because he's bigger than I am. The 10-year-old might say, if she doesn't get on the bus first, she's always scratching and clawing me and I got to get away from her, so I get on the bus first. I don't know what they're going to say. All I know is whatever they do say is going to tell us what concerns need to be addressed so that that problem is solved.
Excellent. We have a comment from a little bit earlier, and I'm finding what happens is that if they're longer, they get cut off in chunks and then they're interspersed with other comments. So I'm not always seeing the full thing, but I got this one.
Got it.
Hi, Dr. Greene. I'm reading Lost at School, An Explosive Child. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I appreciate your previous answer on how to get started. My son is explosive whenever things don't go his way, or if I can't meet his needs or cannot help him immediately. Last night he went to the moon when he couldn't figure out his music homework. I offered to look up the music chart and he could start on math homework while I looked it up for him. He started freaking out, hitting himself in the head, telling me to, I think that's an expletive, and that he wanted to kill me. So the unsolved problem is how to handle his frustration when he cannot get his need met and what he wants.
No, that is not the unsolved problem. That's clumped. That's too global. If we said to him, I've noticed that you're having difficulty when you get frustrated and your needs are not met, we are actually asking him simultaneously about all 37 unsolved problems over which he gets frustrated when his needs do not get met. We are practically guaranteed, I don't know. We also want to do this proactively, so we badly need the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems so that we can list each expectation that he's having difficulty meeting. Now, on this particular one, so in other words, whenever things don't go his way is not going to be specific enough. Whenever we can't help him immediately is not going to be specific enough. Whenever his needs are not met is not going to be specific enough. But there is one thing in this that is specific enough: difficulty figuring out music homework. Now, mom might say, well, that's never happened before, in which case that would be a one-timer and it would have been a surprise. But here's what I find. There are very, very few surprises left when we have used the LSIP to identify very specific unsolved problems and the lagging skills that are setting the stage for those unsolved problems. So recommendation to mom, recommendation number one is please do the LSIP so that you have very specific unsolved problems to work with him on, because the ones that you have here are not specific enough, and Plan B is highly likely to go nowhere if we introduce unsolved problems using those words. But now, let's go to the specific unsolved problem. Let's say it has happened before. If it hasn't happened before, it's a one-timer, and it's going to go into the unpredictable category, but there aren't that many things in the unpredictable category once we've done the LSIP. So that's important point number one. Important point number two, if this is not unpredictable, then our timing is off. Mom, to her credit, was trying to solve the problem The part that I would tune up on, especially if this was a predictable unsolved problem, is the timing. Because once he's hot, all bets are off. In her words, once he's hot, the moonshot has begun. And it's very hard to get that rocket back on the launching pad once the countdown is over. We want to do this proactively. This is why the ALSIP is so important. It helps us do it proactively. If this is a predictable unsolved problem and not a one-timer, here's what it would sound like proactively. I've noticed that it's difficult for you when you're having difficulty figuring out your music homework. What's up? Now we're going to get his concerns on the table. Now we're going to find out what's really going on. We're going to get it from the horse's mouth. Sometimes I call it inside information, information that comes from inside the kid's head. And then we're going to find out if looking up the music chart, which was what Mom tried to do in the heat of the moment the last time, is going to make any sense whatsoever once we know what her son's concerns are. What I often find is that solutions we come up with in the heat of the moment don't make any sense whatsoever, because once we figure out what the kid's concerns are when we're doing proactive plan B. So a lot of recommendations for Mom, but as is often the case, and here's our motto around Lives in a Balance, it all begins with the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. Helps us answer the question why, lagging skills. Helps us answer the question when, unsolved problems. And it makes the entire enterprise proactive. I hope that helps. Kim, what do you have to say?
It might be helpful to say a few words both about how do we keep ourselves emotionally righted when threats are coming our way, and also what do we message to other children in the home when maybe there's an unsolved problem we're not working on, and so there's some big behavior coming our way and the other kids are looking at us thinking, well, how come you're not consequencing him? How come you're not sending him to his room? And that kind of thing.
Well, first things first, what do we do when it is quite clear that our child has lost his mind? He has, as I used to say, I don't say it this way anymore, but in early renditions of The Explosive Child, I used to say that his IQ has dropped about 50 points. I ended up not thinking that was the best way to think about this. But what do? Well, now you're in crisis management mode. And what all the crisis management folks will tell you is there's nothing great to do in the heat of the moment except defuse, de-escalate, keep everybody safe. And realize that what's coming out of your child's mouth at that moment is what I used to call, I guess I moved away from this too, but it's handy. I used to call it mental debris. Just debris. I don't really worry that much about what comes out of a kid's mouth in the heat of the moment. There's things kids say in the heat of the moment that I don't want them to do something impulsive and hurt themselves or somebody else. But in general, if it's not being said outside the heat of the moment, I don't take it quite as seriously. That doesn't mean kids aren't capable of self-harm or harming others impulsively by the things that they are saying they're threatening to do in the heat of the moment. It just means that they're only thinking that stuff in the heat of the moment. If those things are being said outside the heat of the moment, my level of concern goes up even higher. But it's interesting. It's not just kids who say things that are unkind in the heat of the moment. Sometimes significant others say things that are unkind in the heat of the moment. And if they're not saying it outside the heat of the moment, it makes it a whole lot easier to make up. If it's being said outside the heat of the moment, it's a little harder to make up. Inside the heat of the moment, we know that that's mental debris and this person has slightly lost their mind. Their emotions got the better of them, and now there's not a whole lot of rational thinking going on. That's the perspective we kind of have to take with a kid who is calling us whatever that name is that Michelle's kid called her in the heat of the moment. We've got to be able to say, you know what, this is the heat of the moment. That's mental debris. Now, what unsolved problem set him off right now? And when am I going to solve that problem with him proactively and collaboratively so we don't find ourselves in the heat of the moment again? And so that I'll have to think all this stuff when he's calling me names in the heat of the moment the next time. That's part one. Regrettably, I have forgotten part two. Oh, the other kids.
Right.
If the other kids are saying consequence him, it must mean that they've been trained well to believe that consequences are the answer. I don't know where they got that from, but they got it from somewhere, because kids aren't born saying consequence him. Kids pick that up over time. I always tell the story of a little 4-year-old girl that I was talking with a very long time ago. And this is back when I used to ask the question, why? And I said to her, why are you doing this stuff that you do? And 4 years old, she said, I do it for negative reinforcement. All right, now she had no idea what negative reinforcement is, but kids regurgitate stuff. Kids regurgitate, aren't you going to consequence him? But here's what I think kids want most of all. The kids who are not challenging. They want it to get fixed. They don't want him exploding anymore. They don't want to feel unsafe. They don't want to have to deal with explosions. Whatever we do, we got to make sure that our interventions are making those things happen. And if consequences haven't made it happen yet, they're not gonna. So just because the other kids and perhaps other parents are calling for the kid's head doesn't mean that chopping off the kid's head is going to get the job done. We got to do what's actually going to work, no matter what people are saying, people who haven't walked in our shoes.
I'm with you. We've got a lot of great questions I want to make sure we get to. Isn't there anything that my son should do just because I ask him to? I mean, I feel like everything's a compromise.
Well, that is a very interesting question. And of course, there are things that your son should do just because you ask him to. And I'm betting, I don't know the person who wrote this question, and maybe it doesn't feel like this, I'm betting he's actually doing a lot of things that he's being asked to do. Those are what we would call met expectations. And you don't need plan B for met expectations. You only need plan B for unmet expectations. If an expectation is being met, it's not an unsolved problem, and you don't need plan B or plan C. The plans are only for the expectations that are not being met. And here's the amazing thing. I'll say virtually here. Virtually every kid that I've ever worked with, and I'm only saying virtually to play it safe. I can't remember any that this wasn't true for, but I'll still say virtually. Virtually every kid I've ever worked with, prisons, inpatient psychiatry units, residential facilities, schools, families, thousands of them. All of them had expectations they were meeting. And they were meeting it when somebody told them to do it. So there are things that you expect your expectations to get met. And if you say that you want your expectation to get met and a kid does it, it's in the met expectation category. But now just one more thing. Plan B is not about compromising. Plan B is about solving a problem collaboratively and proactively. Yes, I used to refer to plan B as compromising, but it actually wasn't the best word to use. This is very early when I was writing about it. Compromising is something that I wrote about. And the truth is, I don't think compromising between a parent and kid is a terrible thing. But I think that conceptually the best way to think about this is on those expectations that the kid is having difficulty meeting, something's getting in his way. And we need to find out what that something is. And simply telling him to do it is clearly not getting the job done. So no, I don't expect him to meet those expectations. The ones he's having difficulty meeting, simply telling him to do it is clearly not getting the job done. So that would not be my expectation. The goal is to figure out why he's having difficulty meeting that expectation, and then find ways, solutions to address not only his concerns, but also yours, so that this problem is solved and so that the expectation is now being met. Now it becomes clear why compromising may not actually be the best way to describe that process. Solving problems collaboratively and proactively is the best way to describe the process. So I wouldn't use the word compromise anymore. I don't mind compromising. That's not the word I would use. This is problem solving. Only on expectations that the kid isn't meeting. But I'm willing to bet the house there's a whole bunch that he is.
I'm also reminded of how we talk about directly training brainstorming, that kicking off brainstorming can start with meeting halfway, which is compromising, or there's other ways to solve a problem. There's asking for help, there's doing it a different way. So meeting halfway might not fit for the problem you're trying to solve, but there's other options.
The goal is less, this is the interesting thing about compromising. When we're compromising, we are finding often some middle ground between two competing solutions. When we're solving a problem collaboratively, the goal is to make sure that the concerns of both parties get addressed. Notice, that's not finding middle ground between two competing solutions. That's a completely different activity. When you're solving problems collaboratively, you're not necessarily finding a meeting ground between two competing solutions. In fact, probably almost never. What you are always doing is trying to make sure the concerns of both parties get addressed.
Definitely.
That's a great question, by the way. Not that the others haven't been.
We have another great one to follow up to an earlier question. On the topic of clip charts and point systems, both are used in my son's school and he does quite well there. In plan B, various issues at home, he's asked for a similar system at home. How do I get him to stop focusing on rewards?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry about that. I think it's a shame. First of all, I'm glad your son is doing well at school. That's great. I got no complaints about that. I'm really hoping that the reason that he would be doing well at school, even if there were no extrinsic rewards for doing well at school. I'm really hoping that. So there's a lot of kids who do well at school. In fact, most kids who do well at school and are being rewarded for it are being rewarded for doing well at school. It's just that the reward isn't the best reason for them to do well at school. Doing well at school is rewarding in its own right. So the big question is, why do we have to throw something else in there to give a kid another reason to do well at school? Doing well at school is desirable, advantageous, and rewarding all by itself. So I think that the very vast majority of kids who are doing well at school are doing well at school because they can, not because they're being rewarded for doing well at school. And I think that that's a discussion that could be had with your son. You know what, buddy? And I've had these discussions with my own two, as well as with other kids. My own two, thankfully, never asked for a reward system to be used at home. Not sure why. Maybe it's because they've been to a lot of my talks and they know how I feel about reward programs, but quite frankly, how unnecessary I think they are. But it might sound something like this: buddy, you know what? I think it's great that you're getting lots of rewards at school, but I also don't want you to lose sight of the big picture. You're not doing well at school for the rewards. You're doing well at school for a whole bunch of other different reasons. Let's think about what those other reasons are. And what we might hear is, you know what? It feels really good to do well at school. I feel really proud of myself when I do well at school. In older kids, doing well at school may help me get into the college of my choice. Doing well at school helps me get better grades, which may help me do well in the college of my choice. None of those have anything to do with a sticker. I actually think we are doing kids a massive disfavor when we are getting them to focus on extrinsic rewards, when what we really want them to be focused on is what's going on inside. Those are discussions we can have with kids, though, and they make sense to them too.
And it sounds like he's applying what he thinks is helping him, but as we'll point out to him, it isn't. It's just a strategy he's seen that he likes, that he's trying to bridge home. But there are other ideas.
the other interesting thing is, and this by the way is one of the things that moved me as a um, psychologist who early in the day was trained in incentive programs as the main way to make things happen with kids. So I know these programs extremely well. I'm not allergic to them. Quite frankly, I just don't see the point of them, not only for regular old kids who would be doing well whether we were using extrinsic rewards or not, but also for behaviorally challenging kids, because, well, rewind the tape on the vast majority of explosions in behaviorally challenging kids, and you'll find one of them either getting punished, or you'll find one of them not getting a reward that they thought they had coming to them. We don't want to set him off, especially if we don't think it's going to get the job done in the first place. So once again, I'm not allergic to stickers. I don't break out in hives when I'm at Target and I go past the sticker aisle. I'm not allergic to them. They just don't make any sense to me. And once again, I think it's a real tragedy that we have kids focusing on stickers rather than the more important reasons to be doing well at school. And I don't think kids miss stickers. And I also find, and this was what I was going to say earlier, I found that eventually stickers don't do it for the kid anymore. And now we got to start thinking of bigger things. All the while focused on the wrong thing when we could have been focused on intrinsic reward all along instead.
It's great food for thought. Another great question we have is, what do we do when our co-parent is not on board with this model and our lens?
We first ask ourselves, have they had enough exposure to the model to actually be on board? What do they know about the model? If they do know something about the model, do they know enough about the model to actually get them to be on board? Do they have questions about the model? Many people, when they start hearing about the model, interpret the model through old lenses. And so a very common misinterpretation of both Plan B and Plan C is that they involve giving in or capitulating or caving in or letting the kid have his way, when actually neither Plan B nor Plan C has anything to do with capitulating or giving in or caving into the kid's wishes. The truth is, there's actually no giving in the entire CPS model. No such thing as giving in the CPS model. But that's a common misinterpretation. So the most important thing we often do is we look at the co-parent who's not on board, and we try to get a feel for, this should be surprising to nobody, what their concerns are. What is it that they are worried about? If they were to start solving problems collaboratively and proactively instead of unilaterally, what are their concerns about doing that? Why not do it? And there we often get misinterpretations that can be corrected. We get thoughts about how we ourselves were raised and how it worked for us, and how we sometimes have to say, well, what worked for us may not work for this kid. This kid, we've already identified all his lagging skills. If we've done that, apparently the way we were raised is not going to teach him all these lagging skills or solve all of the problems that have been caused by those lagging skills. Apparently he's going to need something different from us. And as parents, we need to make sure that whatever's going to work for him is what he gets, irrespective of how we ourselves were raised. But I often find that that's what I just described is very helpful. But often we're expecting parents to be on board when they actually haven't had enough exposure to the model to be on board. Sometimes it's just mom who's learning about the model, either online or in the therapist's office. And it's actually not fair to expect dad to be on board if he really hasn't had much exposure to the model, and what little exposure he's had has led him to some misconceptions about the model. And by the way, I'm being gender specific there, but it can often work in the exact reverse with genders. There are moms who are the ones who are having difficulty getting on board with the model, and dads who are all over it. So this is not a mom and dad thing. we got to figure out what's getting in the way for the parent who's not on board so we can clear up any misconceptions, make sure they get the information they need, and get them rolling with doing this.
I added the link for our parents forum on Facebook to the comments section. It's called the B Team, and I've seen discussions on this recently actually, and there's a lot of parents who've been there and have had success talking with their co-parent and giving them more exposure to the model via the website, the book, and particularly the audio programming that's parent specific. So join that forum and get support from fellow parents who've been there. We're about at our time almost. Dr. Greene, you have any closing remarks and words of wisdom for our parent group?
Well, I think that it's been enough wisdom for one day, I suppose. I want to make sure that people are aware of all of the resources that are waiting for them on the Lives in the Balance website. And I want to make sure that people are aware of the newly launched Kids Advocacy Action Network. It is powered by Lives in the Balance, and it is our goal for it is to advocate on behalf of behaviorally challenging kids and their parents and teachers and other caregivers. In answer to, yes, good, Kim just answered the question. There's a list of providers on my CPS Connection website if you need somebody in your area. Every year, about 15 or 20 people get added to that list because we want to make sure not only that people have the website to rely on and the Facebook pages, groups, and everything that Lives in the Balance is doing to help people out, we also want to see if we can make sure there's enough therapists out there doing the model well so that people can get the help that they need in their area.
And I would stay tuned to our Facebook page for future parent-specific supports and resources that we add to the website or things like this. This webinar was our first shot of doing this type of format, but we do have the parent radio show that is every Monday, 11 Eastern. Is that correct,
11
Dr. Greene?
Eastern, and they can either listen to the program live and join in and ask questions just like they did today, or if that's not a good time for them, all of the programs are put on iTunes and in the listening library on the Lives in a Balance website. There you have it.
It runs in accordance with the school calendar, so it's not happening this Monday though, correct? Because of the holiday.
It is not happening this Monday because it's Columbus Day here in the United States, but it'll be on the following Monday, which I believe is October 19th.
Yes, fantastic. Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for all your fantastic questions and your participation. And like we said at the beginning, the replay of this webinar will be available. You'll get a link in your email, so you can listen to it, watch it anytime you'd like, and don't hesitate to be in touch.
And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Kim for number one, organizing this webinar, but also for the incredible job she does with the Facebook groups and all that she does on behalf of Lives in the Balance as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining in today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.